Welcome to A2Council Update, a recap of the Ann Arbor City Council meeting on May 15, 2023. My name is Elizabeth Nelson, and I served on Ann Arbor City Council from 2018 to 2022. I understand the inner workings of our local government, and I believe that you should too. This is the voting chart for the council meeting on May 15, 2023. All items were approved unanimously. You can find this voting chart and more information about this meeting at A2Council.com. This week's meeting included approval of the annual budget. After introductory remarks and public comments, Council discussed agenda items for a little over 1 hour. 16 people signed up in advance to offer public comments. 12 people spoke on topics that were part of the agenda. The consent agenda included 5 items and only one expenditure of $115,000. Nothing was pulled for discussion, and the consent agenda was approved unanimously. Council considered rezoning of 1.2 acres at 721 South Forest. This address is currently the site of a 5-story building with 50 apartments. Rezoning has been requested to permit a 12-story building with 228 residential units and 733 bedrooms. 3 public commenters spoke to the issue.
This should be a by right development. Let's fix our zoning so that more developments like these can happen by right.
Staff recommends that the PU zoning district be denied because it's not consistent with the comprehensive land use plan. The proper process would be to revise the plan.
I attended the meeting and read the documents, and the objections seemed to be that the project wouldn't be appropriate for the area by the letter of existing council policy. Maybe that's true, but it feels like it fits to me.
City staff do not support this rezoning because of how far it deviates from the comprehensive land use plan and existing zoning. The current building slightly exceeds the permitted density in R4C zoning, and the new zoning requested by the developer would multiply that density by 7. Council discussed the rezoning for about 5 minutes.
As mentioned previously, the planning staff recommendation was no, and the Planning Commission voted 6-4 and 2 against. That vote warrants consideration of the public benefits and relationship of the building to the surrounding context, but this is first reading, and I don't intend to launch a debate on the details.
I do think it is incumbent upon us when this reaches second reading to actually have a pretty robust conversation around this.
As Councilmember Briggs noted, there are a few items that still could be improved with this proposal, particularly around their environmental impacts and sustainability impacts.
If Council engages in more robust conversation at second reading, it is unlikely to result in substantive changes or improvements. The City Charter explains the significance of first reading and second reading for zoning ordinances like this one. When Council approves an ordinance at first reading, its details are advertised in advance of a public hearing that occurs at second reading. Changes and amendments do not typically happen at second reading because the ordinance details have already been advertised. If Council changes the substance of an ordinance at second reading, it causes significant delay because those changes must be advertised all over again in advance of yet another public hearing and another second reading. In other words, a vote at first reading determines exactly what will be voted on at second reading. Council unanimously approved the PUD rezoning at first reading without any amendments or changes. Council unanimously approved changes to city fees in the public services area without discussion. Council considered changes to city fees in the community services area.
We want to do to make sure that existing parks scholarship programs for fees for those low-income individuals who are having trouble affording things, affording the fees to use our amenities.
Council unanimously approved increases to city fees and community services. Council then considered this year's annual budget. This budget adds 27 full-time employees at a cost of over $3 million. The city also anticipates a $3 million structural deficit beginning in 2026. Earlier in the evening, public commenters spoke to specific allocations in the budget.
I know you can't defund the police all at once, but it's definitely something that needs to be done in the coming years.
You can't just use the police as a cudgel to get rid of all the undesirables for you.
But I think that we should direct the fire department to purchase a much smaller fire truck, like we're starting to see in cities like San Francisco and London and Tokyo.
Another 2 commenters expressed concerns about a plan to build market rate housing at City Hall. City Administrator Dahoney first announced this idea in April.
I would like to pursue the building of a market rate development on the promenade that you're looking at. A market rate development would generate revenue back to the city.
He explained it in more detail at a council committee meeting last week.
A market rate transaction that can generate revenue that comes back to the city. And looking at the site, it's not just the promenade area, it's the parking area that's adjacent to it. You got to look at the whole footprint and determine what's possible.
Public commenters pushed back.
Now I'm going to quote Mr. Dohoney. He said, quote, assuming that we get past the budget on Monday and council doesn't say don't do it, starting May 16th, I'm off, unquote. Then Mr. Dohoney clarified exactly what the proposed development would look like. Quoting Mr. Dohoney again, he said, quote, it's high-end, market rate, high-level finishes. You want to charge as much as possible. You want this thing to generate as much cash as possible.
What are the ethics of building city-owned luxury housing as a source of city revenue in a city that so badly needs affordable housing? Many city council members say very little during city council meetings, so this is a chance to make your voices heard. I ask all city council members, are you in support of such a proposal?
Councilmember Cornell reacted to these residents with an accusation.
I don't believe that Mr. Dohoney wants to carry a real estate development project all on his own and without input. So perhaps we could stop spreading that misinformation.
In fact, just last week, Mr. Dohoney was specifically asked if any council action was required in order to move the idea forward. He said the following.
A resolution of support is helpful. It's not mandatory, but if you approve of looking into it and you want to be on the record saying that, that's fantastic. As to what money, again, we're kind of shooting in the dark. I'll come to you if we need something, but we'll try to figure out how to get it done.
The public commenters accurately quoted other remarks from Mr. Dohoney.
It's high-end market rate, high-level finishes. You want to charge as much as possible. You want this thing to generate as much cash as possible. Assuming that we get past the budget on Monday and council doesn't say don't do it, starting May 16th, I'm off.
Council members, including Cornell, offered mostly unqualified support for the idea of using city property for more high-end luxury housing.
We need housing of all types in the city, and I think it's entirely appropriate to consider market rate housing for city-owned sites in tandem with developing city-owned sites for affordable housing.
And I'd like to note that our budget is balanced this year beautifully, but we are projecting a structural deficit by 2026. So there may be a need to find ways to raise tax revenues through creating market rate housing.
It seems like once we give that space up, we can't really get it back. And I don't want us scrambling in 5 to 10 years because we've run out of room for City Hall.
Mr. Dohoney presented his annual budget to City Council on April 17th. His presentation included this announcement.
My surprise for the evening, there's $1 million in marijuana excise tax that I did not allocate. It's in the fund balance for your consideration. As your advisor, you don't have to spend it all. But I do have an obligation to tell you that I left it. And on May 15th, when you vote, you don't really have to change a thing. Just vote yes. Thank you.
Council followed Mr. Dohoney's instructions. They proposed no changes to the budget, but spent all of the $1 million he had set aside. 8 council members acted as sponsors for 3 budget amendments that, coincidentally, added up to exactly $1 million. The Michigan Open Meetings Act prohibits more than 5 council members from discussing city business outside of a public meeting. Council considered an amendment to allocate $400,000 to the Housing Commission to fund case management services. The money will be transferred to the Housing Commission, and up to 5% of the funds may be used for administrative costs. Council members made statements for 10 minutes.
Our proposed budget amendment aligns with the strategic plan and the support of reputable organizations.
We want to make sure that we're continuing to fund the organizations protecting the mental health and well-being of the people in our community who are most vulnerable, and who struggle to afford to be here.
This is obviously incredibly important work that we're doing that we need to be doing in our community.
Council unanimously approved giving an additional $400,000 to the Housing Commission. Council considered another budget amendment to allocate $100,000 to the Shelter Association of Washtenaw County to support the Delanis Center. The director of the Shelter Association offered this public comment earlier in the evening.
These resources are especially important considering we're seeing both increases in both acuity and the number of people seeking services over the past year.
Council members made statements for 7 minutes.
I am, excited to be moving this forward in terms of providing additional support that can serve both the winter sheltering this winter, but throughout the entire year as well.
Council unanimously approved giving an additional $100,000 to the Shelter Association of Washtenaw County. A third budget amendment allocated $250,000 to fund eviction prevention and another $250,000 to low-income youth services. The money will be transferred to the Ann Arbor Housing Development Corporation to handle disbursement, and up to 5% of the funds may be used for administrative costs. Council members made statements for 10 minutes.
CAN and similar organizations that provide youth programming have experienced significant cuts, especially during COVID, and those levels have not returned to pre-pandemic levels.
Council unanimously approved transferring $500,000 to the Ann Arbor Housing Development Corporation to disperse towards eviction prevention and low-income youth services. Council unanimously approved the annual budget with one additional amendment in support of Parks Fairness. This policy was first implemented in 2010 to make sure that a parks millage would provide additional money rather than simply replace allocations from the general fund. The Parks Fairness policy dictates that the general fund Parks and Recreation budget must increase by the same percentage as the total city general fund budget. Council unanimously approved increasing the general fund Parks and Recreation budget by $205,420. Finally, Council considered a resolution designating and renaming Southeast Area Park, Bicentennial Park, in celebration of the city's bicentennial. The idea of a bicentennial park was announced last month by City Administrator Dohoney. He proposed locating it at Fuller Park with sculptures, garden plots, and a splash pad. Southeast Area Park is located in Ward 3 between Ellsworth and I-94, across from the Swift Run Dog Park. The resolution states that investments for Bicentennial Park be used at Southeast Area Park to develop more amenities. Earlier in the evening, the Director of Community Action Network offered public comment about the park.
We can send a powerful message to our community that our community stands united in supporting our most vulnerable residents. Moreover, Southeast Area Park's strategic location near multiple neighborhoods and various busing options ensures that families from different parts of the city can access the water park with ease.
Council members made statements for 8 minutes.
So this proposal is really about equity, and it's about our goals for our bicentennial anniversary, which include celebrating our rich history and making sure that our future does not leave anyone behind.
The resolution was approved unanimously. The meeting officially adjourned at 9:15 p.m. without any additional public comment. For more details about this meeting, visit A2Council.com.
Welcome to this week's A2Council Moment of Zen.
I just wanted to say thank you so much.
I'd also like to thank those in council.
I wanted to thank Councilmember Harris.
I want to thank Councilmember Watson.
I also just want to echo, the sentiments expressed. I want to thank Councilmember Harrison.
I wanted to thank Councilmember Harrison.
I just want to thank Councilmember Harrison again.
I just want to thank everyone again. I just want to thank again my co-sponsors, Councilmember Harrison, Councilmember Ghazi Edwin, Councilmember Song, and Councilmember Briggs.
I wanted to thank Councilmember Watson for his leadership on this and the other co-sponsors as well.
So I appreciate staff's continued efforts to do so much with what they have with each department and the additional monies that come in through our millages that our community has voted in overwhelming support because I think they believe in the talent and the leadership that we have here.